For years, women were found near highways across several states. Some had red or reddish hair. Some carried no identification. And because the cases crossed county and state lines, investigators could not agree on one basic question. Were these separate crimes? Or was one traveling killer using America's highways as a hunting ground? Decades later, the mystery would be reopened. Not by a famous detective or an elite federal task force, but by a high school sociology class in a small Tennessee town. And the pattern they discovered would bring new attention to women the world had nearly forgotten. This story contains references to murder and violence. Nothing in this episode is intended to sensationalize the victims or present an unproven theory as fact. This is the story of the so-called Redhead Murders, the students who investigated them, and the one suspect eventually connected through DNA to one of the deaths. Welcome to Behind the Story. The name Redhead Murders does not describe one officially solved serial killer case. Instead, it refers to a collection of deaths that investigators, journalists, and independent researchers have considered possibly connected. The broader theory stretches from the late 1970s into the 1990s, but the central cluster that created the most concern occurred during the mid-1980s. Women were discovered in Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, West Virginia, and surrounding areas. Many were found near interstates or other major roads. Several had red, auburn, or reddish-brown hair, and some remained unidentified for more than 3 decades. There has never been one universally accepted victim count. Depending on which cases are included, different estimates have ranged from approximately 6 to 11 women. That uncertainty is important. To establish a serial killer case, investigators must prove meaningful connections, such as a consistent method, physical evidence, geography, victim characteristics, or a common suspect. Here, the similarities were disturbing, but the differences were significant enough that authorities could not confidently attribute every death to the same person. In 1985, investigators from multiple states compared information about the cases. But this was an era before modern DNA testing, searchable national databases, and instant communication between agencies. A victim could be reported missing in one state, discovered without identification in another, and stored under an entirely different case number. A pattern that appears obvious on a modern digital map could disappear inside separate filing cabinets. The phrase Redhead Murders can make the case sound like an urban legend, but these were real women, not characters in a mystery. Lisa Nichols was 28 years old. Her body was found near Interstate 40 outside West Memphis, Arkansas, in September 1984. She was identified the following year. SB Regina Black Pilgrim was also 28. She was found in Kentucky in April 1985, but her identity would remain unknown until 2018. Elizabeth Lamott was only 17. Her remains were discovered near Interstate 81 in Tennessee in April 1985. More than 3 decades passed before investigators confirmed who she was, and in March 1985, skeletal remains were found near Interstate 24 in Cheatham County, Tennessee. For decades, that woman was known only as a Jane Doe. Modern forensic genetic genealogy finally restored her name in 2023. She was Michelle Lavone Inman of Nashville, and she was only 23 years old when she died. Her identity is now known. Her murder is still unsolved. The years these women spent without names illustrate one of the investigation's greatest obstacles. Some were far from home. Some had lost contact with relatives. Missing person reports and unidentified remains records were not always properly connected across jurisdictions. Before investigators could determine who killed these women, they first had to answer another question. Who were they? In the spring of 2018, sociology teacher Alex Campbell introduced an unusual project to his students at Elizabethton High School in Tennessee. They would study the unsolved deaths and determine whether a meaningful pattern existed. This was not a group of teenagers pretending to be television detectives. The students studied timelines, locations, victim information, and historical news reports. They consulted specialists in forensics, behavioral analysis, criminal investigation, prosecution, and even the analysis of knots used to restrain victims. They examined which cases appeared to fit the suspected pattern and which cases possibly did not. Later, students continued the project outside normal classroom hours, meeting regularly and eventually presenting their research to law enforcement representatives and the media. The class developed a possible offender profile, a man who frequently traveled the Interstate 40 corridor, potentially a truck driver or someone else whose occupation kept him moving from state to state. The students also created the nickname the Bible Belt Strangler. But an important distinction must be made. The students did not officially prove that one person committed every murder. Their most significant contribution was organizing scattered information, challenging assumptions, and bringing public attention back to women whose cases had faded from view. Sometimes a cold case moves because investigators discover new evidence. Other times, it moves because someone refuses to let the victim be forgotten. One of the suspected Redhead murder cases would eventually produce a confirmed DNA connection. On January 1, 1985, the bound body of a young woman was discovered along Interstate 75 in Campbell County, Tennessee. Investigators determined that she had been strangled and had likely died several days before she was found, but they could not identify her. For more than 30 years, she remained a Jane Doe. Then, in 2016, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Brandon Elkins resubmitted clothing and a blanket preserved from the crime scene for modern laboratory testing. Investigators recovered a DNA profile and entered it into CODIS, the National Law Enforcement DNA database. The profile matched a man named Jerry Leon Johns. 2 years later, investigators learned about a missing Indiana woman named Tina Marie McKenney Farmer. Her physical description resembled that of the unidentified victim. An intelligence analyst located a fingerprint card belonging to Tina from the early 1980s. Those prints were compared with the fingerprints taken from the Jane Doe. They matched. After more than 3 decades, the woman found beside Interstate 75 finally had her name back. Tina Farmer was 21 years old, but the evidence involving Jerry Johns became even more disturbing when investigators reviewed another crime. 2 months after Tina's body was discovered, Johns picked up another red-haired woman in Knox County, Tennessee. He bound and strangled her before leaving her beside Interstate 40. But she survived. Her statement led to Johns' arrest, and he was convicted in 1987 of charges that included aggravated kidnapping and assault. Johns died in prison in 2015, 1 year before the new DNA profile was developed. In 2019, a Campbell County grand jury reviewed the evidence and concluded that, had Johns still been alive, he would have been indicted for the first-degree murder of Tina Farmer. One homicide now had a suspect supported by DNA and a grand jury finding. But that did not solve the entire mystery. Jerry Leon Johns was connected to Tina Farmer through DNA. He was also connected to the surviving woman through her testimony and his criminal conviction. But authorities have not publicly established that Johns murdered every woman associated with the Redhead Murders. That leaves several possibilities. Johns may have committed additional killings that have never been proven. Another traveling offender, or several different offenders, may have been active during the same period. Or separate crimes may have been grouped together because the victims shared visible characteristics and were discovered near major highways. The interstate system provided unique opportunities for predators. A person could encounter a vulnerable traveler in one state, cross several jurisdictions, and leave evidence hundreds of miles away. Truck stops, rest areas, and isolated sections of road made reliable witnesses difficult to locate and timelines difficult to reconstruct. But a pattern is not the same thing as proof. That is why responsible coverage must separate confirmed evidence from speculation. Tina Farmer's case has a named suspect supported by DNA. Michelle Inman has regained her identity, but her killer has not been identified. Other deaths remain unresolved, and whether one person known as the Bible Belt Strangler ever committed the entire series remains an unanswered question. TBI investigators have specifically cautioned that Johns has not been positively connected to the other suspected cases. The most powerful part of this story is not the sensational claim that a group of teenagers caught a serial killer. That headline goes too far. The reality is more complicated and more meaningful. The students treated neglected victims as people worthy of attention. They placed separate case files beside one another, consulted professionals, and helped generate renewed public interest in investigations that had spent decades in silence. Their research did not replace law enforcement. It did not replace DNA testing, forensic genealogy, or the work of the victims' families. and the students were not responsible for the scientific evidence that connected Jerry Johns to Tina Farmer. But they demonstrated that responsible public research, media attention, and persistent questioning can play a valuable role in keeping a cold case alive. A classroom could not deliver every answer, but it could make sure the questions were asked again. The Redhead murders remain partly resolved, partly disputed, and partly unknown. The evidence led investigators to Jerry Leon Johns in the murder of Tina Farmer, but it has not established that he was responsible for every other death connected to the suspected pattern. And behind every unidentified victim, unanswered case, and faded file is a family that may still be waiting for a name, an arrest, or the truth. So, what do you believe? Did the students uncover the trail of one traveling killer, or did they reveal several forgotten crimes that only appeared connected? Leave your thoughts in the comments, but remember that speculation should never come at the expense of the victims or their families. For more stories hidden beneath the headlines, like this video, subscribe, and join us next time as we go behind the story.